So you moved from LA down to Wichita Falls. Did you get your drum set out of the deal?
Well, yeah, I did. But
All right.
The downside was it was just a cultural shock, because the city was still segregated.
This was 66.
66.
Okay.
And when I say segregated, I'm literally saying that, there was only a large black high school, a large black junior high school, a large black elementary school, all on the side of the town, on one side of the railroad track. Like you would hear the expression other side of the tracks.
Yeah.
This was that. Right?
Okay.
It wasn't that black people would be persecuted or harassed just for going in a different part of the city, but the fact of the matter was the city itself wasn't segregated, so there was very little reason to go outside of your quote-unquote neighborhood unless you were a domestic worker. It's in North Texas.
Right. Yep.
And it's kind of like on a plain. So basically, it's significant because there was like a high volume of nouveau riche millionaires that capitalized on oil and gas leases. So what you've got now is a bunch of what I call nouveau riche, uneducated people, right?
Yeah.
Like the Beverly Hillbillies, literally.
Yeah. They literally struck gold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But apart from that, they have no cultural, So probably the first thing that they all wanted to do was build a country club so that they could feel like they were important, like the bankers and the real oil men in Dallas and Fort Worth.
Right. Gotcha.
You feel me?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I walked into.
Okay.
And the reason I say I walked into it is because one of the first jobs that I got as a youngster was I used to work as a caddy on a golf course, Wichita Falls Country Club. And that was when I first got my real first inkling or first gross observation of what racism looks like. Because when you're carrying bags for these doctors or whatever, right? And you hear them talk after they've had a couple of pints of whatever. The lips get loose.
Yep.
And they start running off at the mouth, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden this one guy would blurt out like, I wonder what the poor people are doing today. That sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And he said, they're probably mowing grass or raking leaves or, nigger work. You know what I mean? You're kind of in earshot of that.
Yeah.
And it just kind of turned your stomach. You know what I mean? I remember walking off of a job because of an incident like that. Some guy just spouting off at the mouth, but it was just totally offensive.
So at that point, did you start to turn to music as more of an escape?
No, I'll say it this way. First of all, I love music because it's just fun to play music. But it wasn't until I started to see entertainers of the next generation, like Sly and the Family Stone, and then Jimi Hendrix. That's what lit my fuse. When I started to see the new paradigm of what I call free expression entertainers from the African-American perspective, right? That were not preoccupied with any sort of racial dynamic, right? They were more there. See, the thing that made Sly and Jimmy so impactful for me was the fact that they both presented themselves like in multicultural dynamics, right? Because Jimmy's story is a whole nother podcast.
Okay.
We won't go down that road.
All right.
I'll talk about that.
Fair enough.
But the fact is, because he was essentially discovered in England and had two white sidemen and then came back to America after he had kind of conquered Europe inside of a 9-month window. He went from being like completely obscure to being like the only thing people wanted to talk about in 9 months. So by the time that the Monterey Pop Festival happened in California I believe it was in June of 1967, that was the year where American major labels really started to embrace the counterculture.
I didn't realize it was that quick. 9 months.
Yeah, for him, it was a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It was a phenomenon. Because he had the benefit of a manager that already had kind of made a social network.
I see.
It was in the upper echelon.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
Chas Chandler was one of the members of the Animals. He was the bass player of the Animals, which is one of the first British invasion bands that came over behind the Rolling Stones. So Chas had made a decision. He wanted to move into production and was seeking new talent and was in New York. And a friend of Jimmy's tipped him off that Jimmy was playing in a club. You should see this guy. Originally, the manager of the Rolling Stones had a kind of a first look at Jimi Hendrix, but it turns out that Jimi Hendrix was already associated with a girlfriend of Keith Richards.
Oh.
And was literally playing a guitar that Keith Richards owned when he saw him in this club setting. And he didn't want to get in the middle of all
that. Yeah.
So he kind of took a pass.
Oh, man.
And so a few months later, Chas Chandler, intersected with the same woman. She's like, you got to come see this guy, right? It was just like Stevie Ray Vaughan or something. It's like anybody could see that this guy is going to happen.
Yeah, it's just whoever
you just need to see this guy, right?
Wow.
And sure enough, the real key was the fact that Chas had an idea because he had acquired the publishing rights to a song called Hey Joe.
Little number.
Yeah, he had acquired the publishing rights to this song called Hey Joe. That was a marginal hit by this artist named Tim Rose. They mentioned Tim Rose in the Led Zeppelin documentary because that's who John Bonham was playing with.
Okay, I haven't finished it yet.
Okay, well, I don't want to spoil it for you.
Okay.
But I will tell you this part.
All right, please. No, go ahead.
Because when Jimmy Page met Robert Plant, they were going to go for another drummer, but Robert Plant said, no, you got to get my man, John Bonham, because they had been playing together.
In sessions, right?
Right. And so when Jimmy Page made an overture, he told John Paul Jones, we got to go see this guy, John Bonham. And they were both like, yeah, that guy's the guy. But he wasn't going to budge because he was playing with Tim Rose.
Okay.
And his wife called Jimmy Page and said, well, the only way he's going with you is you're going to have to pay him the same money that Tim Rose is paying. And that's how he wound up jumping ship to come with Led Zeppelin.
Thank God he did.
But I tell you that because it was just serendipitous, right? So Chas Chandler has the publishing rights to Hey Joe. And the first song that Jimi Hendrix plays is Hey Joe. Jimmy already had an arrangement of this song. It was already in his repertoire.
Yeah.
And that's one of his staple tracks, right?
Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is, Chas said, you come to England, they're waiting for you, and you don't even realize it, right? Because the whole thing about this progressive blues experiment is going full bore because of what had happened, like with Eric Clapton and Cream. Hendrix knew about Cream.
The Yardbirds and all them.
He knew about the Yardbirds. He knew about everything.
Yeah.
He knew about everything associated with pop music. He knew about The Who, because The Who were already playing in New York. They were coming to New York to play. Yardbirds would come to New York to play. Jimmy would see all these things. So he goes under the tutelage of Chas Chandler. And Chas has already kind of gone to the inner circle of the blues cognoscenti, so to speak, like people like Long John Baldry and John Mayall. There's this little clique of guys that are considered like the tastemakers of the so-called progressive blues scene. You know what I mean? He took Jimmy to these guys first, just to meet him. Of course, Jimmy has this very kind of shy, kind of retiring,
right?
Then come in like beating his chest. He's very low key, polite. Then he starts playing, and everybody's face just melts.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And that was what Chaz's strategy was: just take him around to the clubs.
Yeah.
Hey man, I got a friend of mine. he's just in from New York.
Check him
Do you
out.
mind if he sat in for a minute? You know,
God,
because it's Chaz, they'd give him the grace, and
sure.
and then Jimmy would just annihilate everything. And so after 2 or 3 weeks of this, you know, these guitar players start following him around. Pete Townsend tells a story about one day my phone rang, and it's Eric Clapton. You know, I was like, Eric, who? He goes, Clapton. He goes, because he's never thought to call me once ever in life, right?
Yeah.
He goes, would you fancy going to the cinema? You know? Yeah, okay. So I guess he says, so we go to see like a Fellini film or something, and then the conversation starts going to, so what do you think about Jimi Hendrix? You know, like that sort of thing, right? Because these guys are like sitting on the edge of their seat going like, what are we going to do about this guy, right?
Yeah.
Because he's just blazing everybody. Well, then at the end of the day, they all go, well, he is great, and he's a pretty nice guy. We'll just have to deal with it. And I'll round this out this way. When they were organizing the Monterey Pop Festival, the idea was that there was this whole groundswell of underground music occurring specifically in America, but also in Europe. And they wanted to have, it was going to be like the first international pop festival where you had the best of both worlds.
I see.
So this is where you were going to first see like Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company. This is where you would first see like Ravi Shankar, like the exotic Indian sitar master. And then you would see the Butterfield Blues Band out of Chicago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just went on and on and on, like the Steve Miller Band and all these things. Like these were all new bands that were considered underground. They were unsigned, right? And it was going to roll over the course of 2 days, I believe it was a 2 or 3 day weekend. And they wanted to have like the creme de la creme of the new wave of American and international music. Right? So they wanted to get the Beatles as the crowning achievement.
As a headliner.
And Paul McCartney says, well, you know, whatever. They were working on Sgt. Pepper or something at that time. They weren't coming out of the studio. He said, but I'll tell you who you should get. It's Jimi Hendrix.
Wow.
Like, who? Look into it. Okay?
Yeah.
So they made a few phone calls. And David Crosby, this is back when David Crosby was with the Byrds. He had seen Jimi Hendrix in England. And he was like, yeah, you ought to definitely see if you can get that, see if they get the experience. So short story was, by the time the whole thing culminated, it come down to a coin toss as to who was going to play first and second between The Who and Jimi Hendrix. Now, here's what's really funny about that. When Chaz gets to England and gets to the point of wanting to go into the studio, The Who's management created a record label for Jimi Hendrix because they were like, we'd like to manage him. He's like, no, I'm managing him.
Yeah.
Well, who's producing him? He's like, I'm producing. Well, does he have a label? No, but we're going to find one. He says, hold it. We'll create a label for him. So it's Kit Lambert and Terrence Stamp formed Track Records expressly for the Jimi Hendrix Experience to release Hey Joe.
Oh, all right.
And that stuff went straight up to the top. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah.
So that's just a typical sidebar of why you don't want to give me too much leeway.
No,
I'll take you to uncharted territory.
That's the uncharted territory is where I swim best. So that's good. But going back to your days at Wichita Falls and kind of your early years.
It was just horrible. Being from the West Coast, I just had a different sensibility about things in general than my indigenous neighbors. And it's not that I had a problem per se, you know, fitting in with the black kids in Wichita Falls, but they had such a strong resistance to the concept of integration because the racial intensity had been so sustained, right? That they had a big wall of resentment.
Right.
That I just didn't carry with me.
Different life experiences.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it made it a little difficult for me to relate to why they felt the way that they felt even until I started to get exposure to the ignorance factor from, let's say, those golf course encounters and things of that nature, right? My thing, though, was still just finding an inflection point. So as one thing led to another, I used the concept of like teaching myself the drums as my therapy.
Yeah.
So my routine was basically regimented to going to school, coming home, doing the homework I needed to do, and then sequester in the garage for the 2 or 3 hours until 10 o'clock, which was curfew.
Yeah.
To stop banging. Because there's nothing more annoying than a kid learning. And if your kid ever decides to play the drums, you will certainly find out why I'm saying what I'm saying.
Yes. So are there any specific moments or things you go back to in your mind at that time? We just touched on an interaction you had on the golf course, but as it relates to music, anything that really shines out?
There's a funny thing that happened. The year that I was set to graduate high school was the first year that they officially integrated the high schools.
Okay.
So being on the black side of town, so to speak, we had to bus. They were disseminating us to the 5 existing white high schools around the city. My destination was called Wichita High, and they called it Old High. Right? It's kind of like the oldest high school in the city. And I can only tell you that when I got into that dynamic, it was interesting to me because that was the first opportunity where I started to see, let's just say, the different subcultures inside of the high school system. Because you know how it is. It's like jocks are kind of like at the head of the top of the food chain. So that didn't really change. So the jocks that were like the jocks in the black high school just migrated with the jocks in the white high school. Right. The tensions died down once the competition started and these schools started to see how much benefit they were getting from the asset of these black athletes. Right? Because the track teams got faster, the football teams got better, their basketball teams got a whole lot better. You know what I mean? But I'm telling you, their track teams just exploded, right? And it just really kind of diffused, a lot of the initial, because the initial first 3 or 4 weeks were terrible because there were picket lines, overt racial protests, Of course, these are the white people doing the protesting, right? We're not there, so we're not picketing y'all. And me, I just kind of fell in with the art nerds. You know what I mean? Like there's
that was your group.
Those kids, right? Misfit kids.
Yeah.
Because I had a good artistic talent. I had a good art hand.
Oh, is that right?
From childhood. Yeah, I could always draw. And I found art nerds in the black high school, right? And there was a little clique of us.
Yeah.
And we were all into, sci-fi and the whole 9 yards and Godzilla movies and whatever have you. It's kids.
Yeah.
And that's across the spectrum. It's got nothing to do with pigmentation.
No.
Right? It's just curiosity and intrigue and where's the action at?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I say that to say, once we kind of went through the whole awkward machination of people kind of like finding their little niches.
Yeah.
Right? The best thing that ever happened to me was that I ran into this clique of like hippie kids that were into like Jimi Hendrix and Sly Stone, these white kids that were into like this thing that I was into. And I'm the only black kid that they even knew. In most cases, I was the first black kid that they even talked to in life. You dig what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And because I'm from California and because I knew enough about rock and roll in general to just enter a conversation intelligently, right? I was in, and then they told me about this little park that they all used to congregate in, right? And this is where I first got exposure to little marijuana joints and stuff like that. I wasn't drinking alcohol or even thinking about drinking alcohol at 15, 16 years. So I was not even thinking about that.
Right.
I'm telling you straight up, I was so naive. I would look at this Jimi Hendrix Experience debut album called Are You Experienced?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking like, what the hell does that even mean? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
The whole thing was like a complete conundrum to me.
Yeah.
And of course, the artwork on the album, it's like when you're looking at Jimi Hendrix, you're not even sure that he's Black. Is he Hispanic? Is he from India? Like, what's going on? You know?
Yeah.
Because the way that they dress and everything, you just don't have a fixation because he doesn't look like anything else in the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're not even thinking about, like, I'm looking at a Black rock and roll guy.
Yeah.
The difficulty for me was trying to understand what this music was because it was so exotic, so intense, so unlike music. Like what am I listening to? What is this? It wasn't like instantly discernible, like what this was, right?
I see.
Now, again, if I hadn't taken acid, how am I going to be experienced?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Answer the question.
If the album had been Have You Taken Acid? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It would have been a resounding no.
Yeah.
I don't even know what acid is.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like I'm in high school.
Yeah. That's awesome.
But fortunately, I'm in this clique with musicians that are 3 or 4 years older, right? And because I'm playing the drums is kind of a universal instrument. You know what I mean? If you can play the drums or you can play the piano, you can pretty much slide into any type of situation.
Go anywhere. Yep.
Right? So since I was a drummer, it gave me exposure to different individuals, their record collections. And this is where I first started hearing about more exotic pieces like the Moody Blues, which I really enjoyed, but I didn't totally understand it.
I'm not familiar with the Moody Blues.
The Moody Blues? Well, I had to give you a lesson.
Okay.
That's a side.
Yeah, that's good.
But what I'm saying was, when you start digging through I'll put it this way, popular music is just that. It's popular music.
Yeah.
So let's say 9 out of 10 families, let's say if I'm in an African-American community, 9 out of 10 families are going to have like James Brown live at the Apollo, Aretha Franklin's greatest hits, the best of Sam and Dave, a really great Sam Cooke record, a really great Otis Redding record. You know what I mean? Like it's like
they're staples.
They're staples, and you can almost back into anybody's house and find that that's going to be in the record collection.
Gotcha.
Okay, let's flip the script. We go to the white side of town, right?
Yeah.
Now, most of these kids, you're going to find an Iron Butterfly record, right? You're going to find at least 2, if not 3 Cream albums.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
You're going to find everybody had, I got them Old Cosmic Blues Mama, Janis Joplin, and the Big Brother and the Holding Company, right? Her debut album was ubiquitous. And Are You Experienced? Right? Like everybody had a copy of Are You Experienced, right? And for all intents and purposes, I had to kind of like make my way to sort through, like what's what. You know what I mean? Like there's this band called Blue Cheer. Everybody had this record. I put it on. It's considered prototype heavy metal, right? It sounded like a car wreck the first time that I heard it,
Yeah.
I couldn't find the one. I couldn't find a groove. You know what I'm saying? It sounded like this guy has got his clothes on fire. He's screaming. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's this record by The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, who literally has a song called Fire, right? And it's just bananas, right? But these are like psychedelic classics, right? All these records by these groups like the Blues Magoos.
I'm gonna have to look them up. I've never
early Fleetwood Mac. What I call the first wave iteration of Fleetwood Mac was like a heavy blues rock band. It's nothing like the sound that you associate with modern Fleetwood Mac. right? They had this great guitarist named Peter Green.
Mm-hmm.
You got to hear him. He's the guy that wrote the song Black Magic Woman that Santana made popular.
Right.
Got a black magic woman.
Oh, yeah.
Fleetwood Mac recorded that first. But my point is their sound and their vibe, they were like a British 5-piece band, but it's still Mick Fleetwood, the drummer, the same bass player, John McVeigh. Peter Green was like the lead singer, and he was like a guitar virtuoso. Like Peter Green was in lineage of the great blues farm by John Mayall, right? John Mayall and the Blues Breakers was the platform that Eric Clapton sprang from before he started Cream. Actually, before he joined the Yardbirds, and then he left the Yardbirds to form Cream. And then Jeff Beck subsequently brought Jimmy Page to join the Yardbirds. Like you saw that in the Zepp documentary. Well, I'm saying that when Clapton left John Mayall, Peter Green came in behind Eric Clapton. And when Peter Green left John Mayall, Mick Taylor, who later would join the Rolling Stones, came in behind Peter Green, right? So it's like a farm team of like prodigious guitar players coming out of the brand of John Mayall, right? Sidebars, and I'll get you up to speed.
That's all right.
You know what I mean?
I'm learning a lot here.
But that's what's so fascinating about the whole thing, Stephen, is that once you kind of understand how small these circles are, like how small these indigenous circles of creativity are cultivating from, right? It's literally the London story is the Austin story, is the New Orleans story, is the Memphis story, is the Los Angeles story. Like every music center just has a cauldron of like key cultivating sources where byproducts spring. It's not that broad, you know, no matter how many guitars there are in the world, there's only going to be a couple of dozen individuals that are kind of like the root of what everything has been springing from. Fast forward. So so I kind of fell in with the hippie clique. Now I've been playing in my drums. I'm playing drums in my garage, you know, for about a year, right? So I had a lot of chops, but I didn't have any dynamics because I'm not playing with anybody. So, you know, it's like the old expression, you're a builder, right? Like to a hammer, everything is a nail. So I've been practicing my chops to like Jimi Hendrix records, which are extremely complex, extremely challenging. You know what I mean? And it's like literally, it's like I'm in a karate dojo, like by myself, right? And all of these drum chops that I'm hearing from Mitch Mitchell, which are hyper complex, hyper sophisticated. This is not the way people normally play in combo settings, right? Because this is a 3-piece situation.
He's filling a lot of space.
A lot of space. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. And he's coming from a jazz aesthetic, right? Because his major influence is like Elvin Jones, right? Who's a master jazz drummer that worked with John Coltrane, Wayne Shorter, and all these jazz masters, which are really the apex. Let me get that right out of the way. Jazz is the highest American art form. So let's not get that twisted. Let me officially state. But what I'm saying in the gaze of my naivete, right? I'm thinking, well, if Jimi Hendrix is like the greatest, and that's questionable depending on who you're talking to. But let's just say if he's the archetype, then this drummer is the archetype, and that's the path that I'm going to follow.
I see.
Right? Because my goal is to get one day good enough to play with Jimi Hendrix. Like that's my North Star.
Yeah.
I'm headed that way.
Gotcha.
You feel me?
Oh yeah.
And I'll just pick up cues as I go along my journey, like Dorothy towards the Wizard of Oz, right? I'm just going to collect my, information as I go forward, right? That's my direction. Because Jimmy is the coolest. The reason that he's the coolest, because he kind of looks like my dad. I can relate to Jimmy. Millions of girls seem to love Jimmy. Maybe they'll love me a little bit because I kind of look like Jimmy. Maybe there's a chance. But meanwhile, in Wichita Falls, I don't know any other musicians really, right?
Mhm.
So I start hanging out at this park. And there was like a little band shell in Wichita Falls. And one of my friends said, hey, yeah, there's this kid, Danny Humphreys, is a really good guitar player. He's going to be playing with his group. Didn't know these guys from a can of paint. But I just go to this park. And these guys are playing a song by Jimi Hendrix from the Band of Gypsies album, right? Which is,
Slater.
3 or 4, because this is 1969.
Okay.
Right. Maybe it was just on the other side of 1970. I might have been in summer school during that session, but the short story was they were playing a song by Jimi Hendrix, and I recognized that. And the guy that was playing drums was blind. His name was Joe Splon. And I remember meeting all of them like after the little performance or whatever. Mm-hmm. They were like, yeah, well, we're rehearsing over at such and such, gave me the address, come over and you can come jam with us, Yeah. Joe can also play the organ, right? Like Joe's multi-instrumental.
Yeah.
Like Stevie Wonder, right? I said, great, whatever, So that was kind of like one of my first little forays into jamming with a combo, so to speak, And there was no pressure. It was just a situation where, get in where you fit in and, fake it till you make it. Yep. That sort of a thing.
Yep.
And then one thing led to another, and gradually over the course of weeks, because I'm associated with these guys, they're introducing me to other guys. And there's probably only maybe 4 or 5 bands in Wichita Falls during that time. And so what wound up happening was one of my friends in art school was this kid named Jimmy Siraj, who was a really good guitar player. He was also a member of the thespian drama group at high school.
Gotcha.
So, he was in the stagecraft, so to speak. But he's also a good illustrator. He had a little group called the James Savage Reprise. Jimmy and I started running into each other during about that time where I was starting to cross-pollinate with these other little jamming scenarios,
Yep.
And so he's the one that formed Franklin's Mast. And at that time, Franklin's Mast started out as a 3-piece situation without me in it. There was another drummer named Dick Ross. And they were popular enough because Jimmy was a good performer. And the other thing that made him interesting was that he was actually starting to write his own material. So when I think back on it, it was really kind of important that I had a rapport with somebody that was able to kind of like cross that bridge from just playing the cover material to start thinking about original material and not being judgmental about the quality or the caliber of the songs. It was just the fact that you wrote the song, you're not playing somebody else's song.
Yep.
Right. And I knew a guy that could do that.
Yeah.
And that kind of put the bee in my bonnet that, well, if he could do it, maybe I can do that.
Yeah.
And so it was a gradual process, Stephen. I mean, I'm not saying it was an overnight type of sensation, but at a certain point in time, I started sitting in with Franklin's Mast because everybody did seem to like my drumming because I could hit hard. I could hit hard. Back in those days, people used to play loud because all the amps were like tube amps.
Yeah.
It wasn't like solid state.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we used to play music at a real high volume. This was before things got digitized. Mm-hmm. Music was really loud and noisy back in those days, right? Meaning it was just like a lot of ambient, electrical frequencies and things, you know what I'm saying? So music tended to be overdriven. So if I'm going to fast forward a little bit, it was like in that setting, after I'd been involved with 2 or 3 different little units of experimentation, kind of culminated into a situation with the Franklin's Mast clique. But by then, I was graduating high school and going back to Los Angeles. It was during that period of time, in that vacuum of summer school before I went to LA in the fall, a teenage club or teen club type setting, like a like a rec center, had started called Kickapoo Cantico, and it used to be a bowling alley. And that's where we started to see a lot of bands from Austin coming up to Wichita Falls.
Oh, okay.
And that's where I first saw the group Krackerjack, which is from which was from Austin.
Right.
But what was significant about that was that band was formed by the original rhythm section for Johnny Winter.
Oh.
And Johnny Winter was like the first like major artist to be signed out of Texas, apart from like Janis Joplin. But Janis Joplin was signed out of California. Johnny Winter was literally cherry picked out of Austin, Texas, by a guy named Steve Paul. There was a journalist from New York that had come to Austin to interview Doug Somm. And Doug Somm told the journalist, "You need to come see this guy named Johnny Winter, who was playing at a venue on Congress Avenue called the Vulcan Gas Company." And the Vulcan Gas Company was the precursor to what eventually would become like the Armadillo World Headquarters. You've heard about that?
Oh, yeah.
So the Vulcan Gas Company was kind of like a co-op. The same people that evolved into Armadillo World Headquarters were pretty much in control of like the Vulcan Gas Company. That would be like Jim Franklin, the guy that kind of put the Armadillo icon on the map.
Mm-hmm.
You familiar with Jim Franklin?
I've heard the name, but you could probably teach me a little something
more
about
sidebars for you. But there was there's basically an enclave of like graphic artists housed in this downtown building. And then they had a entertainment venue called the Vulcan Gas Company. That was basically like a student hangout. So at that time, you could still see some of the existing or surviving legends like John Lee Hooker, Lightning Hopkins, Mance Lipscomb, and these guys. Even the more famous classic legends like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters would play like at the Vulcan Gas Company. Because by then, when the Beatles came in, it kind of disrupted the whole blues scene. It kind of like displaced, kind of marginalized all these blues players that had been like big draws in the 50s and early 60s. Their careers kind of took a decline in the paradigm shift of the British invasion. I mean, these kids, they didn't even know about Muddy Waters or B.B. King or any of that stuff. They only know about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
Right.
The Rolling Stones are spoon feeding them back.
Yeah.
And to their credit, once the Rolling Stones got established, they started bringing like these guys back out on the road with them. And you'd have B.B. King as an opening act for the Rolling Stones, or John Lee Hooker, or Muddy Waters in particular. What I'm saying was Johnny Winter was discovered in Austin. And this writer at Rolling Stone described him as like this, albino that looks like a ghost that plays faster than Eric Clapton.
Wow.
And this major promoter in New York kind of read this thing in Rolling Stone going like, that sounds like something. And came to Austin to kind of like do some research to see what's going on, and basically made an overture to Johnny going like, well, what would it take for me to get you back to New York? He's like, well, maybe if you get me on a show with Albert King or B.B. King or Freddie King at the Fillmore East, that might
I might do it.
That might do it. You know what I mean? That sort of thing.
God.
Well, so it turns out this guy's name was Steve Paul. He had this nightclub, the small nightclub. It was a private club called The Scene. And it was the hot spot for established touring musicians. It was a private club for touring musicians. And one of his staple clients was Jimi Hendrix, who basically, the Scene was like right around the corner from the record plant recording studio.
Yeah.
Right. But on any given night in the late 60s, like between 68, 69, on any given night, you'd find this menagerie of like a dreamscape of who's who people. So it could be like Stephen Stills and Bob Dylan and Buddy Miles and Jimi Hendrix and, you know what I'm saying? Just jamming because they're in a controlled setting. and it's not for the media.
Mm-hmm.
Like you had to be somebody to even get in, so to speak. And it was very, it was like the Playboy Club.
Yeah.
So Steve owned this thing. So he knew Bill Graham and all the promoters in New York, blah, 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 blah. And he made a couple of phone calls and got Johnny Winter a gig at the Fillmore East, right? Meanwhile, he started shopping a demo tape of a record that Johnny had released regionally called The Progressive Blues Experiment. So the rhythm section was Uncle John Turner and Tommy Shannon. Tommy Shannon, years later, you'd recognize as the bass player with Double Trouble. Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble. But at that time, Tommy Shannon and Uncle John Turner had been with Johnny from like day one. And this is when they were just basically sleeping in sleeping bag. Basically, the thing was, once Steve got a few record labels involved and got this gig booked for Johnny, he kind of milked it and got it to a point where a bidding war broke out before they even heard him play.
Wow.
Just on the hype.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, he played and it was like mind-blowing because he literally was like the fastest gun in America. If you're familiar with Johnny Winter.
I am.
Yeah, listen to his first two albums and you don't have to say much more.
It's lightning.
It was intense. But a bidding war broke out and Johnny wound up getting the largest record contract in history. Literally.
Wow.
At that point, in 1969. I think he signed with CBS. Clive Davis signed him for like $600,000.
Over everybody else around that time?
It was the largest signing in history.
Wow.
Yeah. And they literally went from sleeping bags at the Vulcan Gas Company to like a 7-bedroom mansion in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And within 6 months of that, everybody had heroin addictions. Is the way that the story goes. So the manager kind of swooped in and fired the rhythm section because he needed to save the golden goose.
Yeah, he had to save his dollars.
You know? Now, these guys were tight. I mean, it wasn't like Johnny wasn't being like, we got to get rid of these guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those were his friends, right?
Yeah.
But it was just, they were peas in a pod. And now you're jeopardizing the golden goose. Yeah. You know what I mean? So they released the rhythm section and Johnny and Unc came back to Texas and had been to England enough times to where they had seen like the new wave of what was going on. So they had seen like Led Zeppelin was like at one point an opening act, like during the period where they were like the New Yardbirds. They had opened a few shows for Johnny Winter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And Uncle John Turner had actually gotten kind of friendly with John Bonham and was also into like the oversized bass drums, the oversized, shells.
Yeah.
Right? They had that influence, but Johnny Winter played Woodstock. A lot of people don't know it because it wasn't in the original release of the Woodstock film, but he had a very impactful performance at Woodstock.
I did not know that.
Yeah, with that rhythm section. So the other side of it was Johnny Winter and Jimi Hendrix were like really good friends. Like while they were living in New York, like Johnny and Jimmy were like hanging like tight.
Interesting. Okay.
All the time. You know what I mean? Because Jimmy really liked Johnny's playing and vice versa, that sort of thing. And it's like any other music scene, birds of a feather, they flock together. And, when you're cool, you're cool. And especially when you're at this echelon now, it's, we're like, it's the boys club. You know what I mean? We're doing our thing, right? Now, you're in a situation where people have not really seen the full ramifications of heavy drug use or long-term drug use or any of those things because that whole shift towards recreational drugs had only really just begun in 1966, right? And, it's an oil and gasoline type situation when you have like, a young person that's got financial resources and a drug appetite. So my point was when Uncle and Tommy came back to Texas, they had been at the upper echelon of the whole music scene in a very real way. And they had seen like Rod Stewart in the Faces in 71.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw Humble Pie when it was just forming with Steve Marriott and Peter Frampton. And in England, there was this whole shift towards like heavy, we're not going to call it heavy metal, but just heavy blues rock. So you're thinking like the sound of ZZ Top.
Mm-hmm.
That sound was cultivated by Fleetwood Mac. Fleetwood Mac, when you listen to those early Fleetwood Mac records, you're listening to the heavy influence on ZZ Top. So Uncle Tommy knew about that. So what they did was they put together a 5-piece band called Krackerjack that had a killer singer out of Dallas named Brice Boland, they had a great keyboard player, a pianist named Mike Kindred that was a songwriter, right? They had a stable of great guitar players because Krackerjack should have been a huge band. They should have been like a national/international scale success, right? It's just the mere fact that they just could not cross that bridge from having been in Johnny Winter to kind of like starting from scratch, because it's like their perception of like their value was kind of skewed, you know what I mean? And they wound up not getting signed by anybody because they were too hard to get. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
But what I'm going to tell you is the gospel. They were the most powerful band in Texas, apart from ZZ Top. And I've got a tape of this shit in the car. If you ever want to step out, I'll
please
share it with you. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So those guys came to Wichita Falls and kind of blew my complete scalp back.
Yeah.
Right? Because that was the first time I heard a band that really sounded like a jet had landed.
Yeah. Wow.
Because they're playing like with hyper amplification. What I mean is like, we're playing with gear that you could get in your van.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys are playing with like 3 Ampeg bass amps and double Marshall stacks.
Yeah.
2 double Marshall stacks. God. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, in these small clubs.
It's the real deal.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So in close proximity, I saw Krackerjack, and then not long after that, I met Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top at that same teen center when they were pulling a trailer, when ZZ Top was new.
Wow.
But it was the same deal. They had like double amplification amps for the guitar, double amplification for the bass,
Just power.
Raw power.
Just power.
And then shortly after that, there was this band from England called Trapeze, which was like a contemporary of like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath.
Okay.
There was a singer named Glenn Hughes that literally joined the band Deep Purple when Deep Purple was like the biggest rock band in the world. There was a point where Deep Purple was like, their only rival was like Led Zeppelin. But Trapeze was like a 3-piece like they were proto-metal. Like there was a select group of bands that came out in close proximity to each other that all had similar influences, and it was like Black Sabbath. It was Led Zeppelin first, right? I'd say Led Zeppelin first, but unbeknownst to each other, right? Led Zeppelin is doing this thing, Black Sabbath is doing this thing, Trapeze is doing this other thing, and then this group called Nazareth. And this whole kind of new sound of hard, heavy, blues-based rock just kind of emerged. And then you had like these offshoots of that. And that's where you had like Humble Pie. You hip to Humble Pie? Just make a note yourself.
I got lots of notes here.
Humble Pie, live at the Fillmore.
Okay.
It's a classic, right?
Anything that prefaces live at the Fillmore, I'm probably going to be about it.
Yeah. Well, it's a live album that went like multi-platinum.
Yeah.
You dig what I mean?
Oh, wow.
But I say this to say that Krackerjack kind of had captured the essence of like that.
Mm-hmm.
And them being that tangible and accessible just really made another level of inspiration palpable for me, right? Because now, and I use this expression all the time, I've been friends with Tommy Shannon since like 1971. And when I say this, I don't mean it with a wink and a nod. I'm saying like he's literally the first real rock star that I ever became a friend with. And as a result of him just being kind enough to let me in his inner circle, right? By me kind of being a fly on the wall around musicians of that caliber and them just casually imparting, acquired wisdom upon me as encouragement because they're promoting like my potential, right? They can see I've got something. It's just a matter of just like sculpting. So I say all of that to say that's the thing that really kind of galvanized me to the Austin circuit, so to speak, because I was fortunate enough to be kind of in the inner circle of the best band in Austin at a very young age.
How old are you?
I was 17 when I got
So
here.
you're just graduated.
18.
Yeah.
Going back to Wichita Falls, I graduated in 1970. A friend of mine in one of my summer school classes had a brother named Gary P. Nunn.
The Gary P. Nunn?
Uh-huh. Steve Nunn was a friend of mine in high school. And we were in summer class. And he said, I'm going to see my brother during the 4th of July weekend hiatus. Would you like to tag along? I was like, hell yeah, let's go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Jumped in the VW bug and came down to Austin. And I tell people all the time, it was literally like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't sleep for 2 nights straight, right? We got down to Austin, and because Gary P had a rock band at that time called Genesee. Not like Genesis, but Genesee.
Genesee.
Never understood what that was all about, but that was it. And it was like a 4-piece hard rock band.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like the Cosmic Cowboy thing or nothing like that. I just remember them, a rock and roll band. And they were playing at this place called the Checkered Flag, which was a little bar that's defunct that used to be around 15th and Lavaca. And of course, we're underage, but because we're with Gary, he's just like, shoehorning us into all these different venues around the town for 2 days, right? His brother and his brother's friend. Now, I've got a big afro, and I'm wearing a headband like Jimi Hendrix, and you know what I'm saying? I got a pair of, I never forget, I got this pair of red, white, and blue knee-high boots.
Hell yeah.
That I thought were like the bomb.
Yeah.
Because they were the bomb.
They were, man. You kidding me?
And, it made me look like a real musician. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, fake it till you make it, right? But I've got my gear and I'm just on Gary's hip pocket, And it seemed like that whole weekend we just did all these great things, right? Went to some sort of great little event at the University of Texas that was featuring John Sebastian and B.W. Stevenson. I'll never forget that because it was just a big mass of people, in a promenade somewhere. And then later that night, we went to this club called the New Orleans Club to see Krackerjack again, And then we went to this other club called the Black Queen, which was kind of a basement type club over on West 6th Street. And then the next day we went to a recording studio, which was kind of like the first time I went to a little recording studio, and
which one was it? Do you remember?
I can't recall. Yeah. I really wish I could for the life of me, but
that's all right.
I have no recognition of it. What I do remember was, though, that they did have kind of a plaque that's where Johnny Winter had recorded the original Progressive Blues Experiment album. I remember while I was there, we were eating like peyote buttons during that session. I remember that. And it was real lively. But my point was we were on this kind of like little whirlwind 2-day excursion, and then going back to Wichita Falls, I was like, man, we got to get back to Austin because everything was just so free. I remember being like up on the drag. So we were walking around up on the drag around 24th Street, Back then, all these girls used to wear like these little halter tops. And so many people had long hair.
The counterculture look to them.
Yeah. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
a big statement. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because it really points to the social dynamic that you were existing in Texas, because Austin was an anomaly, an anathema to the rest of the state of Texas. Like Austin was like a safe haven to be free, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Because you had like a high population of youth culture that were driving its own infrastructure. You had like a lot of the young business grads or business college students from the University of Texas that were starting local businesses here.
Yeah.
Everything from cafes to head shops to little clothing boutiques,
Yeah.
record stores, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so Austin really did have a counterculture infrastructure fully cultivated. Kids were running things.
Yeah.
You dig what I mean?
Yeah.
But once you got outside of this bubble, then you were faced with all this other antagonism, right? Because you're dealing with overt racism in so many different pockets of the state. The main thing was when you start hearing about the development of like the concept of the Armadillo World Headquarters, right? It was like a social construct. It was one of those concepts of saying like we're going to develop, you know, a club that kind of represents us as a culture, not just as individuals.
I see.
You know what I mean? It's like anybody that comes here, it's a family vibe, you know? And we're totally not about anything that's driving people apart, right?
Yep.
That's why their booking policy was so eclectic. And it was so easy for you to see, like a lot of people forget, it's like probably the biggest draw before Willie Nelson like got his footing and really, you know, caught favor, you know, with the general population.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't really well known at all when he first came to Austin.
Yeah.
The people that were really popular in Austin were like people like Freddie King, you know, the blues player.
The blues circuits.
He was probably the biggest consistent draw until you started to get to people like maybe I'd say like it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was like Jerry Jeff Walker and people like Waylon Jennings,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that really kind of encouraged Willie Nelson to come down here from Nashville.
Right.
Right. Because Willie was just turning the corner on this whole thing about like wanting to break out from that Nashville system
Mm-hmm.
and look at a more free expression, you know, in terms of his content, the types of songs that he was writing and everything that he had experienced coming from the old guard, you know,
right.
as a quote unquote classic Nashville songwriter.
Yeah.
Right. He was like a revered artist that wanted to step outside of the structure of Nashville. And that's how those people like, you know, that you associate with the cosmic cowboy movement.
Yeah.
You know, they all kind of galvanized around that in support of, you know, Willie's expatriation, so to speak, right?
Gotcha.
That scene was already kind of in full bloom anyway.
Yeah, he was coming here to join that.
There was bands here like Frida and the Fire Dogs and Greasy Wheels, you know, that were kind of like the key proponents, what we call the people that were like really keeping the grease on the wheels, literally, at Armadillo World Headquarters, right? Like these bands that would just play week in, week out.
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. They're just playing, and building a following. But the Armadillo was really liberal in its booking policy because it took a cue from what Bill Graham was doing on the Fillmore West and the Fillmore East, which is to have like multi-genre artists in one setting, right? Like Bill Graham was like really the pioneer of it, saying that I'm going to have a blues player like John Lee Hooker with a psychedelic band like the Iron Butterfly on the same bill, just because you haven't seen him.
Yeah, I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or on the East Coast, you would have Sly and the Family Stone and Miles Davis.
Yeah.
On the same bill.
Yeah.
because Sly's people probably haven't seen Miles. And Miles people probably haven't seen Sly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
And so I remember seeing a lot of really kind of interesting things like that at the Armadillo World headquarters. They'd have like Frank Zappa, you know, and then they'd have like, you know, Frank Zappa with Captain Beefheart, or sometimes Frank Zappa would play 3 or 4 nights in a row, like be on a stint.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And every night he'd have like a different eclectic opening act, you know? So we got real accustomed to seeing this kind of fluidity, you know, of genre bending, you know? Dr. John, at that time it was billed as Dr. John the Night Tripper, you know, with like the Jay Giles band, you know, which is a straight up hard rock party band, you know? Or I remember seeing the original Genesis with Peter Gabriel, with Peter Frampton opening after he had just left Humble Pie, you know, with this group called Frampton's Camel. But you just see all sorts of really cool, interesting things, you know, like Mahavishnu Orchestra, you know, which was this super progressive, futuristic jazz ensemble featuring John McLaughlin. But then those platforms would also serve like locals, you know, to where you'd first start to see people like Eric Johnson and the Electromagnets.
Yeah.
Or you would start to first see, you know, Stevie Ray Vaughan in situations, you know, opening for artists like Freddie King or people with like bigger followings, you know.
Yeah. And what years was this?
Well,
just to give some context.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Armadillo World opened around 1972.
Okay.
Because it opened shortly after the demise of the Vulcan Gas Company. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Armadillo ran all the way up until around 1982, somewhere thereabout. Because by the time I left, it was over. I left in 83. You know what I mean? But it had pretty much like a good 10-year run. You know, by the third year, it became like a destination, like people were clamoring to play there. And one of the reasons was just simply because they got word that the weed was so good in Austin, you know, and because of the proximity of Austin to the border, you know. I'll say this that way, guys. I don't really want to delve into this you know, one of the things that you have to understand is when I'm starting to talk about that countercultural infrastructure, a lot of these venues were subsidized by drug trade to some degree, especially the nightclub. It was well known that in the late 60s, early 70s, you know, that Austin being in the center of the state, it made it a hub. If you had the stones to do it, you know, it was easy pickings, you dig? But you also got to remember back in those days, you know, a joint could get you 3 or 4 years. I mean, I knew people that literally were catching major cases for less than an ounce a week. One of the tactics they would use is like, especially if you had a band with a bunch of equipment, is you have to evacuate the van, like pull all the gear out, all of this stuff out at whatever 3 o'clock in the morning, and then all of a sudden, Officer so and so, you know, comes up with a dime bag, just enough to get you pulled in for detention, where we have to call our agent, who will call his attorney, who will generally fly to whatever. They just can't stand the sight of us. And I can only tell you, we went through that so many times, bro. It's not even funny. It's almost a miracle that I didn't catch a case just because they wanted to give me one so bad. But we were smart enough not to be holding contraband like that. And moreover, it was just a situation where it was so frequent, you know, that somebody was getting illegally detained for, you know, this, that, or the other thing, that we were just hyper vigilant about, like, not giving them any sort of leeway. 9 times out of 10, their rationale was, you know, you guys look freaky we don't like the fact that you're wearing makeup or that you got nail polish on or whatever their, iron in the fire is, they're going to draw some straw out of left field to try to put you in a suspicious position and then try to retrofit some sort of complaint against you, But we knew that it was because we were multicultural, In Franklin's Mass, my guitarist was Asian. I'm Black. My bass player's Caucasian. But I was just making the point of us, being harassed, behind drug suspicions and things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
It was as much because of the homophobia that was so prevalent throughout the state. Because we were literally just kind of on the cutting edge of the glam rock movement that was exploding in England at the time, right? And then in America, it had started to manifest in New York as a result of the appearance of the New York Dolls, And the New York Dolls were kind of like more of a social experiment because the band wasn't gay. Like they weren't like homosexual guys that were cross-dressing, right? Yeah. They were just basically playing with gender bending, from an artistic standpoint. What constitutes male or female aesthetics in terms of fashion just don't apply anymore because in Europe, it hadn't applied for like a decade. See, a lot of people don't understand. It's like the Beatles were in Germany for almost 7 years before they were like discovered as like an international thing, right? Like they cut their teeth. The Beatles were in Germany, I don't know, for something like 18 months.
Interesting.
Playing this rigorous schedule of shows to where they were playing sometimes like 8 to 10 hours a night, right? They were playing at a port town in Germany where their clientele was like naval sailors, like sailors, right?
Gotcha.
And it was kind of like a situation where, like, if you were in Vegas, to where everything doesn't really get popping until around midnight.
Right.
So you're good to go from like 8 o'clock at night until about 6 in the morning. But that's all I'm just trying to say. It's like, this profession isn't something that you can undertake casually. Try to remind people all the time. It's like it takes you roughly 2 years to where you're comfortable with an instrument. I mean, it's one thing to kind of get a rudimentary understanding of it, but it's a whole nother thing to where it becomes like an extension of you. You play guitar?
I do play guitar.
So you know what I mean. There's a gestation period between you understanding like where the chords are and how to, form your chords correctly.
Like you put it well, like it's an extension of yourself.
And then there's a day or a certain week to where it seems like it just all falls into place. Now you're not thinking about it, or moreover, if you think about it, you're just doing it. But you're not looking at yourself doing it. By the time you get to the point to where you can actually become a performer, now you're kind of entitled to present yourself the way that you want to be perceived. You got to understand there was a period in time where everything was so kind of regimented to where before the Beatles, right? You kind of had to present yourself with a uniform type look, and people had to wear like suits and people had to wear like suits alike. And you know what I'm saying? Everybody had to be in lockstep with this one sort of archaic, concept that was essentially formulated in the 50s.
Yeah.
And by the same token, even in the 50s, that's when people really started to rebel expressively. So, that's why people were kind of shocked when Little Richard hit the scene, because it's like, wait a minute, what is going on? And
Well,
what's up with the eyeliner? And what's up with the makeup? And you know what I'm saying? It's all these things, right?
it's the shock factor.
And you can see that all throughout cinema. If you see certain types of, publicity posters for people like Marlon Brando or, anybody that is kind of carrying this so-called hyper sexualized imagery, Elvis Presley in particular, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the British musicians just really kind of picked up on that, like the dramatization aspect of it, right? And they just kind of like took it above board, because the fact of the matter is, like, if this is the new normal, then what's the abstract? And musicians just want to be seen. Now, not every musician is a quote unquote performer. You also have to understand that, right? Like, everybody's not necessarily comfortable in that high spotlight setting.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But those that seek it out are pretty much fearless, right? Because you have to be.
I mean, that's a fair point and an interesting point that you make about not every musician being a performer. I wonder how much talent is out there, but the fear of performance blocks people from actually wanting to get up on a stage and show that talent. And I don't know how you get away from that. How many people, and not so much just performance, but don't want to deal with the business side of the industry.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Thanks for listening. Know someone we should talk to? Give us a shout on Instagram at Austin Music People. Tell your friends, tell your family, and get out there and support Austin music.